Congresswoman Harriet Hageman, thank you so much for joining Wyoming Public Radio today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's been a tumultuous last few months in your chamber. We've had multiple unsuccessful nominees and floor votes for Speaker. I want to ask about your reflections from that time, and how do you think members of the House should make sure that the chamber functions properly from here?
Well, I would say that that actually is part of the chamber functioning properly. We're a republic, and governing is going to be a little bit messy. And it's especially going to be messy to a certain extent when you're in the Republican conference. And the reason I say that is that I work with a lot of very independent-minded people. And I think it's one of the attributes of a conservative or a Republican is that we have our view of how things should be done, and we're pretty dedicated to that. I thought that I did not vote to vacate the chair. I was concerned that it would create a chaotic situation at a time that we needed to be focusing on the appropriations bills and regular order, as well as I had numerous amendments and other bills that I want to move forward that I think are important for the state of Wyoming. At the same time, again, this gives us an opportunity to get in a room and kind of hash out some of the battles that we need to have as Republicans. And it happened in January. And I know people look at these things from the outside and say, oh my gosh, this is terrible. We're never going to survive this. We can't let them govern. But the fact is that is governing. That's how we get together and understand and what each other's concerns are. For us to be able to adopt legislation and move forward as a country and as a body, we're going to have to be able to have these discussions. And sometimes while that might look a little bit messy, the reality is it's the way that government should work, because on the other end, hopefully we're getting some good legislation in place to make people's lives better.
So funding the government has been a big topic in the last few months. You voted against a stopgap bill to avert a shutdown earlier this month. I want to look forward to the deadlines in the new year to fund key parts of the government. What sort of changes are you looking for in order to maybe flip that vote?
Well, the first thing we all have to acknowledge is that the federal government is $33 trillion in debt. It's the largest debtor nation in world history. So it is not something that is sustainable, and something that cannot continue forever won't. That's just the reality. That's just the law of physics. So we're going to have to make some changes to how the federal government works. Our forefathers never envisioned that you would have a federal government this big or have this level of power. The power was supposed to reside in the states. And so we're going to have to move back towards that business model. Is it going to happen overnight? Nope. But it does need to start happening incrementally. And we need to start looking at departments and agencies that we probably shouldn't even exist at the federal level. And one of them that I would say is the Federal Department of Education. Now, I come from a long line of educators. I am a strong advocate of a public education system. I am a product of public education. I went to Casper College. I went to the University of Wyoming. At the same time, I don't think that we need a federal Department of Education that we spend literally billions of dollars a year on, when it should be the states that are funding the education and actually doing it on a local basis. That's just one example. As far as what's going to happen in January, again, what I'll say is that the Republican-controlled House, we have passed 7 standalone appropriations bills. It used to be that when an appropriations bill cleared the House, it was taken up by the Senate. And you would have one appropriations bill. You'd come together in your conference. You'd take it to the president's desk. He'd sign it. That section of the funding would then go forward. They've stopped doing that because there are certain people who want to do omnibus spending bills rather than actually the standalone appropriations bills. So they're the ones that are standing in the way. So I know the Republicans keep getting blamed for this, that we haven't done our jobs. We've done our jobs. We've passed 7 really good appropriations bills. And there is nothing that prevents the Senate from taking up those bills, moving forward with them, going to conference, ironing out our differences so that they can go to the president.
One split within the Republican Party, even in Wyoming in recent months, has been over additional money to Ukraine and their ongoing fight against Russia. You've opposed sending more aid. Why is that?
Well, I guess that what I said it in my speech a couple of years ago. I'm fed up with the idea that the UN and various NGOs and other countries around the world believe that the United States is required for protecting everybody else's border, but not our own. I think the most critical issue facing this United States is the millions of illegal aliens that are flooding our southern and northern borders. What happened in Israel on October 7th should have been a wake-up call for everybody. We are being infiltrated. We have people coming across the border. We don't know who they are. We don't know their criminal history. We know that we have that the number of people on the terror watch list that are being apprehended has absolutely skyrocketed, but we also have over 1 million getaways. So my view of it is that we need to be focusing on America first right now. Again, $33 trillion in debt. Every single dime that we send to Ukraine, we're borrowing. We have people who are struggling to pay their bills, to put food on the table, to put gas in their car, to put a roof over their head. I do not believe that we should be funding the government in Ukraine. What we're doing is we are destroying America from within in order to fight a war where nobody can tell me what the end goal is. We have yet to have any accounting whatsoever for the money that has already been sent to Ukraine, but we know that a massive amount of it is graft, has been corrupted. We also know that nobody will tell us by what metric do we know whether we are succeeding or failing. By what metric do we know whether we should be sending another $1 billion or $10 billion? How do we determine success here? The White House has absolutely refused to engage with Congress at all when it comes to the funding for Ukraine and how that money is being used. And until we get that kind of information, I am a no vote on sending additional funding to Ukraine. I may be afterwards, but right now, until they provide that information and they provide accountability to the American public, I do not see how we can justify continuing to send money to Ukraine.
So you've been in Congress almost a year now. What are some bills that you've worked on or sponsored that you'd like to highlight that you're proud of?
One of them is the Coal Act. I do not believe in government imposed wretchedness, which it completely describes the current administration's energy policy, government imposed wretchedness. So the Coal Act would lift the moratorium on issuing permits for coal in Wyoming. The RAINS Act, which would try to rebalance that power between the congressional or legislative branch and the executive branch with the administrative agencies. Another bill that's very important to me is I've done a bill to delist the grizzly bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We are over double the recovery goal. Even the Fish and Wildlife Service would like to delist the grizzly bears. But every time we do that, you've got the environmental groups that sue to block it. Another one is to stop the USDA from being able to move forward with an electronic identification requirement, ear tag requirement for cattle and bison. And the reason there is it's just another form of surveillance. And just to give you an example of how it will be used, they say that EID mandates are required for traceability of disease, but we have the safest, highest quality meat of any country in the world. The United States does. We already are fully capable of tracing any kind of a disease outbreak. Now, if people want to use ear tags, electronic ear tags, more power to them, but it should not be the USDA that is requiring that. So those are some of the things I've done. I've also done some work on trying to help our Indian tribes become more autonomous. Providing better healthcare services through the Indian Health Services is something that's been a priority for me as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs. And then also I've worked on a variety of real property issues for Indian tribes across the country to try to make it easier for them to engage in economic development and also to right some historical wrongs where some lands have been taken away from like the Winnebago tribe or the Seminole tribe and make sure that they can have those lands back and protect their autonomy and protect their own tribal members. They know better how to take care of their tribal members than any of us do. We need to make sure they've got the freedom and liberty that we do to manage their own resources.
Just a real quick follow-up on that last point that you were making, which is we know that Native Americans go missing or are victims of violent crimes at much higher rates than non-Native people. Now, this is something that you held a hearing on really recently. What do you think there might be some solutions there are for increasing community safety on reservations?
So one of the things that we did is we did have a hearing just 2 weeks ago, and the chairman from the Northern Arapaho tribe came and testified, and he did a fantastic job, Mr. Goggles, talking about the challenges that they face in terms of recruiting officers, training officers, the process that they have to go through to get officers, and then what they need, the challenges of policing a tribe that is that big. just the pure size of it it provides a challenge in terms of being able to provide security and safety services. So one of the things that was discussed during that hearing is that there have been the various organizations, state, federal, tribal, local, in New Mexico, they've been pretty successful at bringing all of those groups together to work together to provide better services on reservation lands. And I've talked to Mr. Goggles about, let's go get their statutory framework. Let's see if that's something that can be implemented in Wyoming so that we make sure that everybody is oaring in the same direction on this issue of public safety.